Today I'm going to talk about my favorite game mechanism in Trois. Here with me today is Biddy, my cat, who turned 10 yesterday. He knows nothing about Trois, so he'll probably be leaving us in a second. There he goes. Trois, which is spelled Troyes, is a worker placement kind of dice drafting game that I believe a new edition recently came out, or maybe a reprinting. I just played it for the first time at my game night on Wednesday. And there's a lot of clever stuff going on in Trois, including a lot of different cards can come out that form action spaces in the game that are very different than a different version of the game where they come out in a different order or they don't come out at all. There's a semi-cooperative element with these events that come out that kind of hurt everybody, and you have to decide, do you want to work together with other players to deal with them? Do you want to deal with them by yourself? Really, really clever event system, really. I could do a whole video just on that. But I think my favorite game mechanism in Trois that I've only seen in a few other games is that when you place a worker, a meeple, on the board, it stays there for the rest of the game. I've only seen this, I think, in Village and A Castle for All Seasons. And in both of those, for some reason, it didn't stand out to me as all that unique, even though it very much is part of those games and it is innovative in both of those games. But in Trois, it really stood out as something interesting, a really interesting choice. The idea of kind of permanence. When you place a worker on the board, it is never going anywhere. It's going to be there for the rest of the game. And in Trois, I think what makes it particularly interesting is that those workers are essentially just reserving spaces for you to use in the future. So if you assign a worker to, I don't know what the actions are called actually, but I'll say say you assign one to the stables, which is not correct at all, but say there's an action called the stables, and you assign a worker there. That worker, when you place him there, he takes the action, he gets it, but otherwise thematically, he's an employee at the stables, and he's going to do some work there, but he's really only going to do work for you if you go back to him and say, hey, I need you to do this thing for me. Here's some money to make it happen. I need to pay you to do this. And then the worker will activate again. So you're essentially just reserving that space to be able to pay and use that action in the future. And it created a really interesting dynamic in the game to have that element where you're not just constantly placing workers and retrieving them, placing them again. Whenever you place it, it's there, and it's your choice as to when you want to activate that worker in the future. It gives an immediacy and an urgency to every new card, every new action that is revealed on the board, and it also gives importance to the kind of the permanent actions on the board, which in Trois determine the number of dice you roll at the beginning of your turn, which is largely good for you. It's not necessarily good; other people can use your dice. But it's free when you use your own dice. So one thing that I did in the game that I played, which I barely lost, but I was pretty close, was that I really focused on getting workers on those actions that give me more dice at the beginning of every round. And those workers, those are actually the only workers in the game that aren't completely permanent. They can kind of be bumped off by you or by other players over time. But as long as no bumping happens, they're there for quite some time. And even with bumping, they're usually there for a while. So this is just a really interesting mechanism. It made me think about worker placement in a new light. I love worker placement, but in every worker placement game that I've designed or played, other than those few that I mentioned, you're placing workers, and at some point you're retrieving them, or at least you're moving them around. But it's not a permanent placement when you're putting them on the board. So I'm kind of interested to explore that design space of assigning a worker to a place and just having them work there for the rest of their lives until in Village, at least in Village, they die at some point, and then they're removed from the board. So I'd love to hear if you can think of another game that uses this mechanism of workers that are kind of permanently placed on the board that you can activate throughout the game. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Or if you have another favorite mechanism in Trois, I'd love to hear that as well. Thanks.